What's going on, noobs? I am Rory, the Perpetual Noob, and welcome back to another exciting Hollow Knight boss discussion. This is the 20th video in a series where I'll be discussing each boss of Hollow Knight, where we can find them, how we can defeat them, and how does this boss fit into the world of Hollow Knight. Today is a special episode because we'll be talking about God Tamer, and subsequently, Trial of the Fool. We find God Tamer in the Colosseum of Fools, which is accessible from the top left of Kingdom's Edge. Before we get to fight God Tamer, we have to fight through the Trial of the Fool, the last of 3 trials in the Colosseum of Fools. We will get into the Trial of the Fool later. A special note about God Tamer. We can fight her multiple times. She's a part of the Trial of the Fool, so we have to beat God Tamer every time we want to complete the trial. God Tamer will leap into the air and swing her lance down. She brings her lance down just as she lands. God Tamer will track us with this attack, bringing her lance down where we were when she started the leap. Despite this fact, it appears that there is a maximum range to this attack, and it seems that range is about 75% of the arena. This attack can happen in conjunction with God Tamer's Beast's attacks. God Tamer telegraphs this attack when she bends her legs. It's actually a very slight movement. God Tamer brings the lance down with an overhead swing just moments before landing. Let's call this attack the leap attack. God Tamer's Beast will curl up into a ball and roll across the arena towards us. They will traverse the entire arena and not stop when they hit us. They'll only stop when they hit the wall and bounce high into the air and try to land on us. The bounce does track us, landing where we were when God Tamer's Beast struck the wall. The Beast is invulnerable while they're rolling. Aside from the tracking bounce, this attack is very similar to Watcher Knight's rolling attack. God Tamer's Beast telegraphs this attack when action lines sprout from the ground on the Beast's side. Then they draw their head back, begin curling up, and soon transform into a rolling ball of death. Let's call this attack the rolling attack. God Tamer's Beast will spew blobs of infection towards us. The blobs travel in 3 groups. One group drops just in front of God Tamer's Beast. Another flies across most of the arena. And the third group splits the difference. This formation creates large, safe gaps on the arena floor between the groupings. The blobs will persist on the ground for about 2 seconds. God Tamer's Beast telegraphs this attack when their eyes light up. They lift their head, exposing a glowing sac full of infection. It flashes 4 times before God Tamer's Beast spews the blobs. Let's call this attack the spew attack. Before we even get to fight God Tamer, we have to get through the rest of the Trial of the Fool, and this trial is brutal. The Trial of the Fool is the last trial in the Colosseum of Fools. It is comprised of 17 waves before God Tamer arrives. And for this discussion, I'm counting a wave as an arena change. For example, platforms rise up or spikes cover the floor. Each wave is unique, but thankfully the enemy spawn patterns are essentially the same every time. So if you're like me and you die a lot to this trial, you'll eventually memorize the enemy spawns and know what's coming and can prepare ahead of time. The Trial of the Fool is one of the most difficult challenges in the entirety of Hollow Knight for me. I spent hours trying different charm combinations, learning the enemy spawns, and learning what tactics worked and didn't work. I had nearly everything the base game had to offer when I finally beat the Trial of the Fool. The Pure Nail, 10 charm notches, 8 hit points, 3 soul vessels, the Shade Cloak, nearly every empowered spell, and 31 charms. And I still struggled. I did not prepare my charm loadout for God Tamer. I prepared my charm loadout for the Trial of the Fool. My equipped charms were Nailmaster's Glory, Quick Focus, Grub Song, Spore Shroom, Thorns of Agony, and Mark of Pride. The Nail Art Great Slash was absolutely key for me in this trial, especially on waves 14 and 15. Having the strongest nail, the Pure Nail, meant my Great Slash was doing maximum damage, and could one-shot or two-shot nearly every single regular enemy in this trial. Being able to beat enemies as quickly as possible was absolutely necessary for my victory, and Nailmaster's glory ensured that speed because many enemies showed up within 1 to 2 seconds. Quick focus was essential for me. Maybe not during waves 14 and 15, as you'll see, but every other wave, and of course, during the God Tamer fight. I could manipulate some of the waves to grant me more time to heal, but in the middle of waves, quick focus is just too good. Grub Song wasn't as necessary as I thought. I gained soul from my great slashes and other nail strikes, so even though I was getting hit a lot, Grub Song really wasn't providing me with anything. In fact, if I got to choose my charm loadout again, I would swap Defender's Crest for Grub Song. That'd be a much stronger choice for me. Primarily because I was using Spore Shroom. I wanted something, anything, that could give me extra free damage against these enemies. And with all of the quick focus and powered healing I knew I'd be doing, Spore Shroom was a fantastic choice. It wasn't much damage, but every little bit helped. From previous attempts, I knew that I'd be hit a lot, and that there'd be a ton of enemies everywhere, so I packed Thorns of Agony. Again, having the Pure Nail meant Thorns of Agony was dealing maximum damage, which was pretty awesome considering how often I got hit and how far those tendrils reached. Thorns of Agony was a completely necessary charm for me. Now, Mark of Pride was a bit of an odd choice for me. Originally, I was using Quick Slash because Quick Slash, it's just so strong. But I needed range. I needed range more than I needed to swing my nail a lot. I needed to keep enemies away from me, and I needed to be able to reach those annoying primal aspids. You'll see what I mean. And Mark of Pride got me there. This charm was incredibly helpful. Wave 1 of the Trial of the Fool begins with the arena in its original state. A shielded fool spawns on the left, and a sturdy fool spawns on the right. As soon as one of these enemies is defeated, 2 armored squits spawn in the top and bottom center. When all of those enemies are defeated, 2 shielded fools spawn on the left and right, and a primal aspid spawns in the top center. When all 3 of them are defeated, 2 winged fools spawn on the left and right, followed by 2 sharp balders, also on the left and right. Dispatching those 4 enemies gets us to Wave 2. Wave 2 begins when 2 platforms rise up with 2 sturdy fools, ground left and ground right, and 1 primal aspid, top center, spawn. Shortly after they spawn, spikes jut up from the floor, making the floor unusable and killing the sturdy fools. With those 3 enemies defeated, we start Wave 3. Wave 3 begins when the ceiling lowers, and 1 winged fool in the top center, and 3 battle obbles at the left, right, and bottom center spawn. Defeating these 4 enemies spawns 2 furious vengeflies at the top left and top right. Even before the second furious vengeflies exploded, we move on to Wave 4. Wave 4 begins when the platforms and spikes fall away, and 2 heavy fools spawn at left and right. Then, one after another, 6 bellflies spawn and slam themselves into the floor with their signature explosion, killing the heavy fools. Climb one of the walls and just hang out in a high corner until all the bellflies are done. After the last bellfly explodes, we move on to Wave 5. Wave 5 begins when the ceiling rises, returning the arena to its original state. Then 3 death loodles spawn at the top center, then top left, then top right. Once all 3 are defeated, let's move on to Wave 6. Wave 6 begins when 4 platforms rise up, and 5 death loodles spawn at the bottom left, top center, top right, and bottom right. Defeat all 5, and we move on to Wave 7. Wave 7 begins when all 4 platforms go away, and 3 death loodles spawn at left, right, and center. Defeating these 3 enemies moves us on to Wave 8. Wave 8 begins when 4 platforms stacked in a column appear in the center of the arena and spikes fill the floor. Then 2 armored squits spawn at left and top right. Defeating one enemy spawns a primal aspid at the top left. Defeating another enemy spawns another primal aspid at right. Defeating another enemy spawns another primal aspid at left, and a winged fool at right. Defeating the remaining enemies brings us to the next phase of Wave 8. 4 Garpedes crawl across the arena, 1 at each platform level. 2 come from the right, and 2 come from the left. If platform 1 is at the top, and platform 4 is at the bottom, Garpedes reach the platforms in this order: 3, 4, 2, 1. The 4 Garpedes cross the arena, spawning a winged fool at top left, and 2 armored squits at right, then top right. After defeating those 3 enemies, we move on to Wave 9. Wave 9 begins with the platforms and spikes going away, returning the arena to its original state. A shielded fool at left, a heavy fool at right, and a primal aspid at center all spawn. Defeating 2 of these enemies spawns a mantis traitor at center. Defeating another enemy spawns a mantis petra at center. Clearing out all of those enemies spawns 2 mantis petra at left and right, and 1 mantis traitor at center. Defeating 2 of these enemies spawns 1 mantis petra at left, and 1 heavy fool at right. Clearing out all of these enemies spawns 2 soul twisters at center. 3 mistakes will spawn one after the other while we are fighting the 2 soul twisters. Defeating all of these enemies spawns a soul warrior who will spawn directly over our head. Follies will spawn while we fight this soul warrior. Once the soul warrior is defeated, and that's all that matters because apparently the game doesn't care about the remaining follies, they will just persist until we kill them. We now move on to Wave 10. Wave 10 begins when 6 platforms rise up and spikes cover the floor. A Volt Twister spawns somewhere in the air. Defeating this Volt Twister spawns a Soul Twister, again somewhere in the air. Defeat them to spawn another Volt Twister somewhere in the air. Defeat this Volt Twister to spawn another Volt Twister and a Soul Twister somewhere in the air. Defeating that duo moves us on to Wave 11. Wave 11 begins with the platforms and spikes going away, returning the arena to its original form. A Soul Warrior spawns above us, and a Soul Twister joins them. Defeating this duo moves us on to Wave 12. Wave 12 begins with the walls closing in on us, shrinking the arena's floor space to about half of its original size. The Shade Cloak is a huge help for this wave. A Winged Fool spawns at left, and a Sturdy Fool spawns at right. Defeat them, and 2 Lesser Molochs spawn at left and right. Defeat them to spawn 2 more Lesser Molochs at left and right, and a Winged Fool at top center. Defeating all of them spawns a Brooding Moloch in the center. Defeating the Brooding Moloch moves us on to Wave 13. Wave 13 starts when the walls close in on us real tight. Like, so tight we pretty much can't move. Then a Garpede starts crawling down towards us. Just before they reach us, the walls spread enough to allow us to get out of the way. 7 more Garpedes will crawl down towards us in pairs, though the 5th Garpede crawls alone, giving us essentially 1 column of safety per pair. This is a fantastic time to refill our soul by striking the passing Garpedes with our Dream Nail. Survive these 8 Garpedes, and we move on to Wave 14. Wave 14 begins when the walls spread back out to the halfway mark, and spikes cover the floor. Wave 14 and Wave 15 are arguably the most difficult waves because there is no safe space on the floor, and therefore no way to heal, unless you're using that one special charm. A Winged Fool and 2 Armored Squits spawn. Once they're defeated, a Primal Aspid and an Armored Squit spawn. Defeating them spawns 1 Mantis Petra and 1 Armored Squit. After defeating them, 4 Battle Obbles spawn. After defeating 3 of these Battle Obbles, 2 Winged Fools spawn. Defeating the remaining enemies moves us on to Wave 15. Wave 15 begins when the ceiling drops to about 50% of the arena's original height. One armored squid spawns. Defeat them. And another armored squid spawns. Defeat that one. And we finally move on to Wave 16. Wave 16 begins when 3 platforms rise up and the walls and ceiling return to their original positions. Holy cow, we can finally heal again! Just in time for 14 death loodles to spawn, one after another. Now, with the floor still being covered in spikes, many death loodles will simply destroy themselves. Once every death loodle is dead, we move on to the final wave before God Tamer. Wave 17. Wave 17 begins with the platforms and spikes going away, returning the arena to its original state. One heavy fool spawns at left, and one sturdy fool spawns at right. Once one of them is defeated, a mantis trader spawns at left. Defeating another enemy, spawns a winged fool at center. Defeating another enemy, and a mantis petra at center, and a shielded fool at right spawn. Finish off all of those enemies to spawn a soul twister somewhere in the air, and a shielded fool at right. Defeating that duo spawns a volt twister somewhere in the air, and a heavy fool at left. Defeating that duo spawns 2 sharp balders at left and right, and 2 armored squits at top left and top right. Defeating that quartet spawns a heavy fool at left, a winged fool at top center, and a shielded fool at right. Defeating one of those enemies spawns a sturdy fool at left. Finish off these last 3 enemies and we are finally at God Tamer. Good God. But doubly better, we've got a lot of time to heal before God Tamer actually shows up. When it came to fighting God Tamer, I tried to focus her first. I used Monarch Wings and Shade Cloak to do my best to avoid everything God Tamer's beast did so I could focus all of my damage on God Tamer herself. Thorns of Agony ended up still being a solid choice for this boss fight because it allowed me to distribute heavy damage amongst both enemies. Thanks to me struggling to dodge God Tamer's beast, Thorns of Agony was triggered a lot. It didn't hurt that I had 8 hit points, and it didn't hurt that I had the strongest nail possible, the Pure Nail. This whole combination meant that I dealt something like 300 damage to both God Tamer and her beast. And God Tamer only has 600 health, and her beast only has 500. Aerial movement was very important for me in this fight while I focused on God Tamer and tried to dodge God Tamer's beast. Then, once God Tamer was down, I could utilize a pogo stick tactic to defeat the beast. Honestly, just getting to God Tamer was so hard that I'm glad God Tamer and her beast felt, by comparison, to be a bit of a break. Clearing enemies as fast as possible is the name of the game here. Every spell works here, with Vengeful Spirit being a shining star, especially because of waves 14 and 15. Overall, the Shaman Stone Charm is fantastic because of the damage increase. Changing your Vengeful Spirit into a shotgun with the Fluke Nest Charm is a great idea, if for no other reason than because Vengeful Spirit will now do twice the damage if all of the flukes hit. As I mentioned earlier, Defender's Crest would have been great to have with Spore Shroom. Giving us a huge cloud of damage would be advantageous, because the cloud can give us that last bit of damage we so desperately need. Steady Body is a solid charm, because we'll be in the air defeating enemies a lot, and often above spikes, so ensuring that we don't bounce off of them is a good, safe option. We want as much damage as possible, as quickly as possible, right? Charms like Unbreakable Strength, Fragile Strength can work, but then just don't die. Quick Slash and Stalwart Shell will all help maximize our nail damage. Having the Shade Cloak is a huge boon. The Shade Cloak is found at the bottom right of the Abyss, and it grants us the ability to safely dash through enemies and their attacks. This is key for surviving the trial, especially Wave 12. Holy cow. Having the Shade Cloak means we can get the Sharp Shadow Charm, and this would be a pretty good charm because it increases our dash distance by 33%, which would be very helpful in waves 14 and 15. Not to mention the fact that the Sharp Shadow Charm augments our Shadow Dash to do damage equal to our nail. Dream Shield is a good charm because of its offensive and defensive qualities. My nail was the strongest it could be, the pure nail. I definitely recommend upgrading your nail at the nailsmith who resides at the bottom left of the City of Tears. I highly recommend finding more charms and charm notches. I absolutely recommend collecting soul vessel fragments to gain more soul vessels, which in turn means more healing and spell uses. And I wholeheartedly recommend collecting mask shards to gain more hit points. One final other tactic. Kill the beast. Do not focus on God Tamer. Focus on her beast instead. Killing her beast stops God Tamer from continuing to fight. There. Now you've only got to kill half of a boss. Once God Tamer is defeated, we get a ton of Geo, and we are rewarded with the title of Fool. The end. So who is God Tamer? From the Hunter's notes, veteran warrior of the Colosseum of Fools. Fights by the side of the creatures she has trained. From what little information we have, the Colosseum of Fools appears to be a long-standing institution of Hallownest. The little fool hanging upside down talks of many warriors coming through the doors, seeking trials of intense and deadly combat. The owner / leader, I guess, of the Colosseum has long since died, and yet rabid fans still fill the seats. And there's God Tamer at the end of it all, the deadliest and probably longest running combatant of the Colosseum. It's a strange place, and it seems to have a never-ending supply of fighters. That's it for our boss discussion about God Tamer. Thank you for joining me today, noobs. Stay tuned for future Hollow Knight boss videos. If you've got any thoughts about God Tamer, either about the fight, or about the trial of the Fool, or about God Tamer as a part of the world of Hollow Knight, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. I am the Perpetual Noob, and I'll see you all next time.